pack your stuff. You are too expensive," the chief financial officer said right before the initial public offering. So I left. At 9:30 a.m. the opening bell rang, but the trading board did not show numbers. It flashed ready, authorizing officer missing. Trading halted. The initial public offering price hit $0.00 in seconds. I knew the ship was sinking before we even hit the iceberg. In fact, I, Nicholas, was the one meticulously counting the lifeboats while the captain was busy selling the wood for scrap. They called it a tech unicorn, a $2.3 billion valuation built on buzzwords, vaporware, and the collective delusion of a venture capital firm that had not seen a profit since the dot-com bubble pop. My official title was Chief Compliance Officer. My unofficial title, which I earned with every filed report, was the man who said no. For 16 months, I lived inside the regulatory colon of this company, scrutinizing every S-1 filing, every risk disclosure, every clause that kept the Securities and Exchange Commission from turning our open plan office into a crime scene exhibit. An initial public offering is not a party. It is a colonoscopy performed by the federal government, and I was the doctor holding the camera. The office vibe in those final weeks was like a frat house the morning before finals. If the frat house was located in a WeWork, and everyone was high on greed, you could smell it, a mixture of nervous sweat, stale LaCroix, and the distinct metallic scent of unearned arrogance. The engineers were picking out colors for their Lamborghinis. The sales team was already spending commissions that did not exist yet. Then there was Brad Miller, our chief financial officer. Brad was 32, wore loafers that cost more than my mortgage, and had a smile that looked calibrated by a focus group to maximize trust while minimizing accountability. He was the kind of guy who used synergy as a verb and headcount as a euphemism for human beings. He treated compliance like a pesky rash, something to be ignored until it became unsightly. "Nicholas," he'd say, leaning against my doorframe with that casual lean that signals ownership, "why are we bogging down the narrative with all these risk factors? The investors want a dream, not a disclaimer." "Because, Brad," I'd reply, without looking up from my dual monitors, "if we don't disclose the fact that our proprietary algorithm is currently held together by duct tape and 3 interns in Belarus, the Securities and Exchange Commission will put us in federal prison. And orange really is not your color." He'd laugh, that hollow, breathless laugh that rich people do when they think the help is being cute. "You worry too much, Nicholas. That is why we pay you." That was the dynamic. I was the brakes. He was the gas. We were hurtling toward Wall Street at 100 miles an hour. My entire career had taught me that rules were the only constant, the only source of stability when people inevitably failed you. I had seen the fallout from corporate compromises before. I had been caught in the crossfire of other people's ethical shortcuts. This past betrayal, though years ago, was why I held integrity so tightly, guarding it like a shield, refusing to let my name be linked to a mess that was not legal. I struggled daily with the lack of trust I felt toward everyone above me, viewing my detailed paperwork as my only true ally. The strain of this constant defense was immense. I had spent 14-hour days ensuring every I was dotted and every T was crossed. My blood was 80% espresso. I had missed my own birthday dinner. I was the invisible glue holding the valuation together, the one who caught the fact that the chief executive officer's brother-in-law was technically a related party transaction that needed to be disclosed before it became a headline. I was the one who scrubbed the investor deck of claims that were borderline fraudulent. I was the safety net, working to keep the whole precarious house from falling, driven by my duty and my deep need for professional justice. The internal conflict of serving a company I knew was fundamentally flawed was an exhausting daily battle. It was a duty I performed not for them, but for the rules themselves. The chaos of those final weeks had already extracted its toll, demanding every ounce of my focus and sanity. Only 2 days ago, I had spent the entire evening cleaning up a mess that almost derailed the S-1 filing, a mess caused by the chief executive officer's own reckless personal spending. It was the night of my niece's piano recital, a milestone I had promised I would not miss. I did not go. My duty was to the filings, to the rules, and to the illusion of competence that I was single-handedly maintaining. I was the safety net, the one who worked late fixing their mistakes so they could ring that bell. So when the calendar invite popped up on my screen that Friday afternoon, just 72 hours before the planned initial public offering, I did not think much of it. The subject line read, Org Structure Sync. The host was Brad Miller, Chief Financial Officer. Location the Glass Fishbowl Conference Room A. I assumed it was a last-minute panic attack about the quiet period. I assumed he needed me to soothe some jittery board member. I assumed stupidly that I was part of the team. I grabbed my notebook, a physical, leather, bound one because I do not trust the cloud with my unfiltered thoughts, and marched down the hall. My mind was already running through compliance budgets and external counsel fees. I walked into the conference room. The glass walls were soundproof, a feature I usually appreciated. Today, however, it felt immediately like a tomb. Brad was sitting at the head of the table. Next to him was the Vice President of Human Resources, a woman named Sharon, who had the emotional depth of a Croton. She was actively refusing to make eye contact with me. There was no coffee, no open notebooks, no agenda slides projected on the screen. There was just a single, thin manila envelope sitting on the mahogany surface. "Close the door," Brad said. His voice was flat, lacking the usual sales guy clinical cheer. I sat down. I did not ask what was going on. I have been in corporate America long enough to know the precise, sterile smell of an execution. It smells like cheap carpet cleaner and betrayal. We have been looking at the post-initial public offering operating expenses. Brad started, looking not at me, but at a spot on the wall just above my left ear. The street wants to see leaner margins. We need to show efficiency. Okay, I said, keeping my voice steady. We can look at the external counsel budget. I have been saying for months that Latham and Watkins is overbilling us for. It is not legal counsel, Nicholas. Brad interrupted. He finally looked at me. His eyes were dead, vacant, swimming in a sea of Vizine. It is the compliance headcount. It is too heavy for a mature public company. I blinked once. We are not a mature public company, Brad. We have not even rung the bell yet, and I am the compliance department, and two paralegals. Exactly, he said, forcing a tight, thin smile that did not reach his eyes. We are outsourcing the function. We have found a firm that can handle the monitoring for a third of the cost. The board agreed this morning. He slid the manila envelope across the table. It barely made a sound on the smooth wood. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. We are offering you 2 weeks of severance if you sign the non-disclosure agreement today. We need your badge and laptop. My heart did not pound. My breathing did not catch. I felt a cold, deep well of clarity form in my stomach. Humiliation was not the primary feeling. It was the sting of betrayal combined with the overwhelming idiocy of his action. You are firing the chief compliance officer 3 days before the initial public offering, I asked. I was not shouting. I was genuinely curious about the level of stupidity I was witnessing. The filings are done. Yes, but Brad, do you have any idea? Wes is locked, Nicholas, he snapped, his facade cracking just a little. The auditors signed off. Your job is done. We do not need a babysitter anymore. We need profit. He checked his expensive watch. Security will escort you out. Do not make a scene. It is a small industry. A scene. Oh, Brad, I replied, standing up slowly and smoothing the imaginary wrinkles on my trousers. I do not make scenes. I make policy. I did not touch the envelope. I did not scream or cry. The cold knot of clarity solidified. I had given this company my blood, sweat, and sanity, fixed their messes, and ensured they were legal enough to go public. And they discarded me like a used toner cartridge because Brad wanted to pump the stock price by a fraction of a penny. I do not need the severance, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the full weight of my decision. And I do not need the escort. I know the way out. Brad looked relieved. He thought he had won. He had no idea he had just cut the brake line on his own expensive Ferrari. The sting of betrayal was momentarily overridden by a rising sense of calculated purpose. I had been too trusting, too vulnerable in my devotion to the job, and now I would return to the only thing that mattered: professional justice. The walk from the conference room back to my desk was the longest mile of my life, a surreal procession through a carnival of my own professional funeral. The open plan office was buzzing. A sales guy was literally ringing a brass gong, because he had closed a small deal. Someone had popped a bottle of Prosecco near the kitchen. Balloons that spelled out, "Initial public offering ready," bobbed against the ceiling vents. I was a ghost walking through a celebration of my swift, unceremonious execution. Sharon, the vice president of Human Resources Crowton, trailed 3 steps behind me like a nervous undertaker, probably making sure I did not steal a stapler or smash a monitor. She did not need to worry. I treated my exit like I treated my audits, methodical, precise, and completely documented. I reached my desk. I picked up my purse. I picked up the framed photo of my cat, Barnaby. I left the company-issued laptop. I left the badge. "We need your phone, too," Sharon squeaked, clearly reading from a script. "If it is company-issued." "It is not," I said, not bothering to look at her. "And neither is my dignity, Sharon. So, back off." I took the elevator down to the lobby. The heavy-set security guard, Tony, who I had brought donuts to every Friday for 2 years, looked confused. "Leaving early, Nicholas." "Permanent vacation, Tony," I said, forcing a smile. "Keep an eye on the place. It is about to get interesting." I walked out into the humid Jersey City air. It smelled like low tide and corporate exhaust. I hailed a cab, sat in the back, and finally, for about 30 seconds, I let my hands shake. Just a little tremor. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of humiliation and the bitter residue of giving my all to people who valued a cheap quarterly win over essential safety. I had protected their legality, and they had repaid me by treating me as disposable. But then the shaking stopped. My brain, my beautiful broken rule-bound brain, clicked onto something Brad had said. "The filings are done. The S1 is locked." He was right. The documents were drafted, approved by legal, and sitting in the secure server ready for transmission to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the New York Stock Exchange. But here is the thing about complex bureaucratic systems: they are designed by people like me, for people like me. They require specific keys. In the rush to get everything ready, the external law firm had set up the final transmission protocol through an internal gateway to prevent unauthorized leaks or premature filings. The system required a dual authentication digital signature from the designated authorizing officer on the morning of the initial public offering to release the final pricing amendment and effectiveness letter. This process, known in regulatory terms as receiving the effectiveness order, was the final, non-negotiable step before the stock could trade. Guess whose name was on the line for designated authorizing officer? Not Brad's. He did not have the compliance certification. Not the chief executive officers. He was too busy doing podcasts. It was me. I was the key man, or rather, the key compliance officer. My digital certificate, linked to my unique employee ID and my biometric login, was the only thing that could push the button to make the stock tradable. And Brad had just fired me. He had terminated the employee ID. He had revoked my access. By firing me to save $250,000 a year, he had not just removed a cost center. He had bricked the entire launch sequence. He had cut the brake line, and he did not even know it yet. My humiliation vanished, replaced by a cold, hard sense of professional vengeance. The system I had spent 16 months maintaining, the rules Brad dismissed as boring paperwork, had just become my weapon. The thought sent a jolt of pure triumph through me. I pulled out my phone. I could have called them. I could have sent a text to the general counsel saying, "Hey, you morons need to file a Form 8K to change the authorizing officer and get a new digital key issued by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which takes 48 hours minimum." If I were a team player, I would have done that. If I were a good person, I would have done that. But I was not a team player anymore. I was a liability. I was too expensive. I opened the Securities and Exchange Commission Edgar filing app on my phone, the public-facing one. I logged into my personal credential account, where I keep my own professional certifications. I navigated to the company's public profile. I saw my name listed as the contact for compliance and regulatory affairs. I clicked update status. I typed 2 words, officer separated. Then I hit submit. It was not a sabotaging act. It was a compliance act. I was legally required to notify the board of my termination to ensure I was not held liable for future filings. I was just following the rules, the ones Brad hated so much. The cab driver looked in the rearview mirror. "Bad day at work, lady. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, where the company's logo was probably being projected onto a building right now. No, I said, a genuine smile finally creeping onto my face. Actually, I think it was a very productive day. The cold, quiet clarity of vengeance had fully replaced the shock of betrayal. My internal conflict was resolved. My duty was no longer to the company, but to justice, delivered strictly by the book. Saturday morning in my New Jersey apartment was usually the sound of lawnmowers and regret. For me, it was the sound of silence. I did not get out of bed until noon. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the phantom vibrations of a work phone that was no longer on my nightstand. Usually, my weekends were a triage of panic attacks, 3 a.m. Emails from Brad asking if we could legally categorize a strip club visit as team building, or the chief executive officer wondering if he could tweet about the stock price without going to jail. Now, nothing. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and watched my neighbor Dave struggle to assemble an IKEA bookshelf. It was peaceful. It was terrifying. The internal struggle was the worst part of the wait. I had set the trap, but now I had to endure the 48 hours until the launch. My professional ethics, the ones Brad had paid me to uphold, screamed for me to call the general counsel to save them, to prevent the disaster I knew was coming. It would be the professional thing to do. But then I remembered the sterile conference room. I remembered the manila envelope. I remembered Brad's face, smug and cold, saying, "You are too expensive." I remembered the times he had asked me to massage the numbers, and the nights I stayed late fixing his mistakes while he went to basketball games. I remembered the absolute, unmitigated gall of firing the safety inspector while the plane was taxiing to the runway. I was not the villain here. I was the karma. My husband, Greg, was cautious. He walked around me like I was an unexploded bomb. He knew how much of my soul was wrapped up in the job, in upholding my sense of integrity. "You okay, Nicholas?" he asked, putting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "I am fine, Greg," I said, poking the eggs. "I am just waiting." Waiting for what? For the other shoe to drop, or rather, for the shoe to realize it does not have a foot inside it anymore. I opened my personal laptop, my MacBook with stickers of cats and 3x5 spreadsheets on the lid. I logged into LinkedIn. It was a bloodbath of toxic positivity. My feed was clogged with posts from my former colleagues, photos of the pre-initial public offering gala Friday night. Brad was there holding a microphone, looking like a youth pastor who had just discovered cocaine. "So proud of this team," the caption read. "We built this from nothing. Monday morning we changed the world. #unicorn. #initial public offering. #grind set." I scrolled past a photo of the legal team, 3 junior associates who looked like they had not slept since 2019. They were smiling, but their eyes were screaming for help. They did not know. They assumed someone else handled the final authorization. They assumed Brad had a plan. Then a notification popped up in my private email, not LinkedIn. The sender was Sarah Jenkins, Talent Acquisition, BlackRock. The subject heard a rumor. I raised an eyebrow. The body count was not even cold yet. "Hi, Nicholas," the email began. "Rumor on the street is you are a free agent as of yesterday. If true, that is the company name's loss and our potential gain. We have been tracking your compliance work on the S1, impressive navigation of the risk disclosures. Coffee Monday. We have a hole in our oversight division that needs a heavy hitter." I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted better than it had in years. The possibility of landing at a firm that valued ruthless competence, rather than fearing it, was immensely appealing. I typed back, "Make it Tuesday. I am going to be busy watching a fire on Monday." Sunday dragged on. The temptation to intervene was a physical itch. I could call the external counsel, Mike, a decent guy. It would be the professional thing to do. But then I remembered the phrase, "too expensive." I remembered the times I stayed late fixing Brad's mistakes. The thought that I, the safety net, was being punished for being effective hardened my resolve. I was not the villain. I was simply the instrument of justice. Sunday night, I poured a glass of Pinot Noir and turned on CNBC. They were doing a segment on the upcoming week's initial public offerings, and the big one to watch. A talking head shouted, "Is a company name valuation seeking $2.3 billion? The chief financial officer, Brad Miller, Says they are operationally leaner than ever heading into the launch. I laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Leaner. I whispered to the television. You have no idea, Brad. I went to sleep like a baby. A baby who knows the nursery is rigged with C4. The peace of that night was profound. The discipline required to maintain my silence was the ultimate test of my resolve. I would not succumb to the urge to save them, thus compromising my principles. My duty was complete. My new duty was to the outcome of the rules. Monday morning. The day of the reckoning had arrived. I did not go to Wall Street, and I certainly did not go to the office. I went to Frank's Diner in Hoboken. It is a place where the menus are sticky, the coffee tastes like battery acid and despair, and nobody asks you about your equity compensation. I sat in a corner booth with a view of the television mounted above the counter. It was tuned to CNBC, volume low, closed captions on. 9 a.m. The pre-market coverage was in full swing. The camera cut to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. There was the podium. There was the banner with my old company's logo. There was Brad Miller standing next to the chief executive officer, clapping like a seal. He looked fresh, rested, and utterly unaware of the abyss waiting beneath his $5,000 loafers. I ordered eggs over easy. Keep the coffee coming, I told the waitress. I am watching a comedy. 9:15 a.m., the bell ceremony was starting. The chief executive officer rang the gavel. Confetti cannons fired. Everyone cheered. The chyron on the screen flashed the ticker symbol, with the indicated opening price moving up slightly, $24, $26. I took a bite of toast. I checked my watch. At this exact moment, in the back offices of the exchange and the clearing houses, the trading systems were attempting to handshake with the company's filing server. They were looking for the final effectiveness order, the digital key that says, yes, the Securities and Exchange Commission has blessed this mess, and the authorized officer has signed off on the final pricing. The system would be pinging my employee ID. My employee ID would return a user-disabled error. The system would then check the backup. The backup was, oh wait, there was no backup, because Brad had cut the redundant headcount to save $40,000 a year. The thought brought a small, satisfied smile to my lips. His greed was so perfectly self-destructive. 9:20, 9 a.m. the countdown. Floor traders gathered around the specialist post, waiting for the first trade. I watched Brad on the screen, his smile unwavering, radiating manufactured confidence. The tension in the air, even in the diner, was palpable. 9:30 a.m. the market opens. The bell rang, trading started across the board. Green numbers, red numbers, flashing lights. Except for one ticker. On the screen, under the smiling face of Brad, the ticker for our company sat frozen. Ticker. No price. No volume. I leaned forward, my eggs momentarily forgotten. 9:32 a.m. The smiling faces on the podium were starting to twitch. The chief executive officer was looking down at his phone. Brad was looking at the specialist, who was frantically typing on his terminal and shaking his head. On the television, the anchor frowned. Looks like we have a slight delay on the opening of Shard Company name. Probably just a technical glitch. High demand, maybe. Technical glitch, I muttered, feeling a surge of pure triumph. Sure. 9:35 a.m. The banner changed. It turned bright red. The words filled the screen. Us trading halted. Regulatory imbalance. The text scrolling at the bottom of the screen was pure poetry. New York Stock Exchange reports unable to verify final effectiveness filing. Authorizing signature missing or invalid. I saw Brad pull his phone out. He was tapping furiously, then he stopped. He stared at the screen, looking around the podium. He looked like a man who had just realized he walked into a gunfight carrying a banana. The reality of his colossal, self-inflicted error must have slammed into him with the force of a market crash. The waitress came by to refill my coffee. Honey, you okay? You are grinning like you just won the lottery. Better, I said, watching the chaos unfold on the television. I just watched my ex-boyfriend crash his car. By 9:45 a.m. the rumors started hitting the financial blogs. I refreshed Twitter on my phone. At Stock Guru. Hearing rumors that a company name fired their compliance chief on Friday and forgot she was the only one with the Securities and Exchange Commission keys. #amateur hour. The camera cut back to the podium. The confetti was still on the floor, but the smiles were gone. Security was moving in to escort the executives off the floor, not because they were in trouble yet, but because they looked like idiots standing there while their stock failed to launch. Brad looked pale. He looked like he was about to vomit on his $5,000 loafers. I finished my eggs and wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. My phone, sitting on the table, lit up. Caller ID Brad Miller. I let it ring. It rang again and again. I picked it up, looked at the screen, and then pressed the red decline button. I was not ready to talk. Not yet. The price of my consulting fee was going up by the minute. The initial public offering price, which was supposed to launch the company into the stratosphere, was effectively $0.00, all because of one revoked employee ID. This was the pinnacle of professional satisfaction. My phone did not just ring, it had a seizure. After I declined Brad, the chief executive officer called, then the general counsel, then Sharon from Human Resources. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb, dropped a $20 bill on the table for a $10 breakfast, and walked out into the sunshine. I had a meeting to prepare for, but first I needed to savor the quiet certainty of my victory. I took the PATH train into the city. The contrast was delicious. On the digital screens in the train station, the news was looping the disaster. Initial public offering disaster. Tech giant stumbles at the gate. While my former colleagues were spiraling, I was calculating my worth. I arrived at the BlackRock offices in Midtown at 11 a.m. The air conditioning was crisp, the glass was clean, and the people looked like they actually knew what the word fiduciary meant. Sarah Jenkins, the recruiter, met me in the lobby. She did not look like a recruiter. She looked like a shark in a channel suit, all sharp angles and intelligent efficiency. "Nicholas," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crush walnuts. "You are trending on Twitter." "I saw," I replied. "I assume that is not a disqualifier." "Disqualifier." She laughed, a short, pragmatic sound. "We are a hedge fund, Nicholas. We profit from chaos, and rumor has it you are the architect of this particular chaos. Our general counsel wants to meet you. Now." We went up to the 40th floor. The conference room view was panoramic, overlooking Central Park. Sitting there was Mr. Henderson, the general counsel. Gray hair, pinstripes, and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. He represented the kind of seasoned, ethical ruthlessness I respected. "So, Nicholas," Henderson said, sliding a bottle of Pellegrino across the table. "Let me get the timeline right. They fired you Friday. They did not revoke your securities and exchange commission standing. They did not appoint a successor. And they tried to go public this morning." "That sums it up, sir," I said, taking a sip of the water. "And you did not tell them? Oh, Mr. Henderson," I explained carefully. "On Friday afternoon, I was told I was too expensive for the company's future. I was stripped of my access and my duties. It would have been a violation of my non-disclosure agreement, had I signed it, to perform any work duties after my termination. Warning them would have been work. I simply followed the rules they set." Henderson looked at Sarah, then he looked back at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "I like him," he said. "He is dangerous. We need dangerous." The external validation of my strategy was immensely satisfying, cementing my move from defense to offense. While we were discussing my potential future, my past was burning down. At 12:30 p.m., I finally checked my voicemail. "A message went up, Brad." "Nicholas, pick up. We have a technical glitch. We need your login. Just text it to me. Hurry." Message 2, Brad. "Nicholas, seriously, this is not funny. The exchange has halted us. Legal says we need a signature. Call me." Message 3, Chief Executive Officer, Nicholas. "This is the Chief Executive Officer. There has been a misunderstanding regarding your departure. We need to discuss a consulting arrangement immediately. Name your price." Message 4, Brad, seething with rage. "You did this on purpose. You vindictive person. I am going to sue you into the ground. Pick up the phone." I played the screaming message for Henderson. The sound of Brad's panic echoing in the high-rise conference room was exquisite. "He sounds upset," Henderson noted dryly. "He is about to be unemployed," I predicted. "The Securities and Exchange Commission does not like it when you lie about having a compliance officer. It is considered material misrepresentation indeed." "So, Nicholas," Henderson said, getting down to business, "we want to hire you, Senior Vice President of Compliance, double your old salary. Bonus structure that would make your old chief executive officer weep. I accept, I said, matching his clinical tone, but I cannot start until next week. Why? Because, I said, checking my watch, I have a feeling I am going to be hired as an independent consultant by a very desperate tech company in about 10 minutes, and I have a very specific rate in mind. How much? Sarah asked. $600 an hour, I suggested. Henderson shook his head, a gesture of almost parental disapproval. Nicholas, look at the stock ticker. It is at zero. They are losing millions in reputation every second. Do not insult them with 600. Ask for $1,500 and a written apology. I smiled. I like the way you think. By the time I left BlackRock, the courier had arrived at my apartment. It was not a lawsuit, it was a contract. It was from the company's external law firm, Latham & Watkins. Mike, a decent partner I knew, had sent it over. Scope of work: interim compliance remediation. Rate $1,500 per hour. Term: until initial public offering effectiveness is restored. Attached was a sticky note from Mike. I told them they were idiots. Please help us fix this before I get disbarred. I signed the contract, but I added an addendum writing it clearly in the margin. Work to be performed remotely. No direct contact with Brad Miller. All instructions must come through the board of directors. I faxed it back. Yes, they still use fax. It is harder to hack. Within an hour, I was logged back into the system, not as an employee, but as a hostile consultant. The digital wreckage was impressive. In their panic, the junior team had tried to override the signature requirement by uploading a portable document format of my old signature. That was a felony, known as forgery. Right there in the compliance log, I screenshotted it immediately and sent it to Mike with the subject line, "Do you want to go to jail or should I delete this?" He replied instantly, "Delete it." Oh God, my leverage was absolute. I was getting paid an exorbitant amount to perform my old job, and I was holding the evidence that could send the chief financial officer to prison. My professional justice was complete, and the financial reward was staggering. I spent the next 6 hours untangling the knot I had created and charging the company $1,500 an hour to do so. I had to file a Form 8K disclosing the departure of the compliance officer, me. I had to file an amendment to the S1 appointing an interim officer, also me, but expensive me. I was fixing the house I had been kicked out of, and they were paying a mortgage payment every 60 minutes to get me to do it. But the real twist was the internal communications. Because I had my admin access back, now as a consultant I could see the internal Slack channels. The general channel was a dumpster fire. Are our options worthless? I bought a boat on credit on Friday. Help. Brad is in the boardroom with the lawyers, I heard shouting. Then I found the executive private channel. Brad, she sabotaged us. We need to spin this. Say she was incompetent and we fired her for cause, and the delay is us fixing her mess. Chief Executive Officer Brad, shut up. The lawyers say if we slander her, she walks. If she walks, the Securities and Exchange Commission audits us for real. We are hostage. Brad, I cannot believe we are paying her this much. It is extortion. A general counsel, no, Brad. It is the market rate for stupidity. You fired the only person who knew how to start the engine. Pay him. I took a screenshot of that too for my scrapbook. Then my phone rang. It was the chairman of the board, a serious man named Arthur, who usually only spoke to God and other billionaires. "Monsieur Nicholas," he said, his voice gravel and old money. "Mr. Chairman," I replied. "We have a board meeting tomorrow morning, emergency session. We need you there to present the remediation plan to the investors. I am working remotely, sir, as per my contract." "Nicholas," he said, and the tone dropped, heavy with corporate urgency. "We need you in the room. The institutional investors are threatening to pull out. They need to see the person in charge of compliance is competent, and currently, you are the only person they trust." "I will be there," I said. "But I have one condition." "Name it." "I want Brad Miller in the room, and I want him to stay for the whole presentation." Arthur paused. "Don't." I hung up. Tomorrow was not just a meeting, it was an autopsy. I pulled out a vintage Armani blazer I had bought at a consignment shop years ago and never had the guts to wear. It was sharp enough to cut glass. I needed my executioner suit. Walking back into that building the next morning felt like entering a parallel dimension. The initial public offering ready. Balloons were deflated on the floor, looking like sad, wrinkled grapes. The silence was heavy. I stepped off the elevator on the executive floor, and heads turned. Whispers started. Is that him? That is Nicholas. He looks taller. I walked into the mahogany boardroom. The long table was full. The board of directors, the chief executive officer, the general counsel, and at the far end, looking like he had not slept or showered in 48 hours, was Brad. He looked at me with pure venom. I looked at him with professional indifference, the cold clarity of my vengeance making me feel untouchable. Mr. Nicholas. Arthur, the chairman, nodded. I took the seat at the opposite end of the table from Brad. The power dynamic was palpable. Let us cut to the chase, Arthur said. The Securities and Exchange Commission has suspended our offering. The New York Stock Exchange is furious. BlackRock is asking if we are running a Ponzi scheme. Mr. Nicholas, what is the status of the compliance remediation? I opened my folder. I did not use a slide deck. I used paper. Mr. Chairman, I began, my voice clear. Filings are currently being corrected. The issue was not a technical glitch. It was a failure of governance. Objection. Brad snapped. He could not help himself. It was a process error. You failed to hand over your credentials before you. Brad, I said, cutting him off without looking at him. My credentials are biometric. Unless you wanted to cut off my thumb and keep it in a jar, they could not be handed over. You would know that if you had ever read the Compliance Protocol Manual, Section 4, Paragraph 2. The room went silent. Furthermore, I continued sliding a document down the table. Here is the email log from Friday. You can see the timestamp of my termination, 2:15 p.m. You can see the timestamp of the attempted illegal upload of my old signature by your team Monday, 9:45 a.m. I looked pointedly at the general counsel. That is forgery. By the way, the general counsel put his head in his hands. He is trying to make us look bad. Brad hissed. You are bitter because we let you go. This is a shakedown. Brad, be quiet, Arthur rumbled. No, let him speak, I said. I turned to face Brad fully. You fired me to save $250,000 a year. In the last 48 hours, the valuation of this company has dropped by approximately $400 million based on pre-market gray market trading. You stepped over $1 to pick up a dime. You fell off a cliff. I stood up. I have restored the filing status. The Securities and Exchange Commission is willing to lift the halt on Friday if they receive a signed attestation of control. Great, the chief executive officer said, looking desperate. Side, I cannot, I said. Why not? Brad shouted. That is what we are paying you $1,500 an hour for. Because, I said, dropping the bomb, as a compliance officer, I cannot attest that the company's internal financial controls are sound as long as the chief financial officer is a man who attempted to defraud the Securities and Exchange Commission on Monday morning. I pointed at Brad. He tried to fake the filing. I have the logs. If I sign off on this company while he is still the chief financial officer, I am complicit, and I do not do complicit. I looked at Arthur, the chairman. It is him or me. If you want the initial public offering to happen Friday, Brad has to go today for cause. The choice is yours. Brad stood up, his face red, utterly shocked. You cannot do this! I built this finance team. I own the relationships. You own a halted ticker. I said. The room held its breath. Arthur looked at Brad. He looked at the plummeting stock charts on the screen. He looked at me, standing there in my thrift store Armani, exuding cold, quiet authority. Brad, Arthur said softly, pack your things. Watching a narcissist implode is a bit like watching a controlled demolition. It is loud, dusty, and ultimately inevitable. Brad did not go quietly. He threatened to sue the board. He screamed that he was the visionary. Security, my friend Tony, was called up. Escort Mr. Miller to his office to collect his personal effects, Arthur ordered. Then escort him out of the building. His access is revoked immediately. I stood in the hallway and watched. Brad walked past me, a cardboard box in his hands. He stopped. You think you won? He sneered. You are a paper pusher. Nobody remembers the compliance officer. That is the point, Brad, I said. sipping a coffee I had liberated from the executive lounge. Ideally, nobody should notice us. We are the foundation. You only notice the foundation when the house collapses because some idiot tried to save money on concrete. He stormed into the elevator. The doors closed. I did not feel a rush of giddy joy. I felt a profound sense of balance. The universe, for once, had done the math correctly, restoring the integrity that had been violated. I went back into the boardroom. The atmosphere was entirely different. They looked at me with fear, yes, but also a grudging respect. So, the chief executive officer said, his voice trembling slightly, "Brad is gone. Will you sign the attestation now?" "Yes," I said, "but I have one more condition. Anything. I want the junior associate team, the ones Brad tried to throw under the bus for the forgery, to receive full immunity and a 20% raise. They were following orders from a superior and will not have their careers ruined because of his failure." The chief executive officer nodded immediately. "Done." I sat down at the head of the table, Brad's old seat. I pulled out my laptop. I inserted my digital key. I opened the Securities and Exchange Commission portal. Status remediation complete. Officer Nicholas, interim. Action request to lift halt. I clicked submit. "It is done," I said. "Trading should resume Friday morning?" "Thank you, Nicholas," Arthur said. "Well, we would like to discuss you staying on permanently. The chief financial officer role is open. You know the numbers better than anyone." It was a tempting offer. Chief financial officer, the corner office. The salary that would let me retire in 5 years. I looked around the room. I saw the fear in their eyes. They did not respect me, they feared me. They did not want me because I was a leader. They wanted me because I was a hostage negotiator who happened to be on their payroll. I was not going to be caged by their fear again. They wanted the weapon, not the leader. I was done. "No, thank you," I said. "Why?" Arthur asked, genuinely shocked. "Because," I said, standing up and closing my laptop, "I already accepted a job at BlackRock. I start Monday. My job there is to audit companies like this one, to find the Brads before they crash the plane." I picked up my purse. "I will bill you for the week. You have my address." I walked out. I did not ring a gong. I just took the elevator down, waved to Tony, and walked out into the Jersey City smog. It smelled like victory. Friday morning came again. This time I was in my new office at BlackRock on 52nd Street. My desk was mahogany. My chair was ergonomic. My view was Central Park. On the wall, a massive flat-screen television was tuned to CNBC. 9:29 a.m. The camera was back at the New York Stock Exchange. The banner was up again. The confetti cannons were reloaded. The chief executive officer of my old company was there, looking humble. He rang the bell. 9:30 a.m. The ticker flashed a ticker symbol, $22.50. It opened. It did not crash. It did not halt. It just traded. It was boring. It was stable. It was compliant. "Hey, new guy." Mr. Henderson was standing in my doorway. "I see your old friends finally managed to launch." "They had some expert help," I said. "I saw the invoice you sent them," Henderson said, chuckling. "Bold. They paid it yesterday. Said wire transfer cleared this morning. Most people would have just let them crash and burn. You fixed it." "Why?" Henderson asked. I looked at the screen. I saw the faces of the junior analysts on the floor, the ones whose jobs I saved. I saw the investors who did not lose their pensions because I stepped in. "Because I am a compliance officer, sir," I said. "I do not like messes, even the ones I did not make." "Well, welcome to the big leagues, Nicholas. We have a file on a biotech firm in California. Their chief financial officer just bought a private island, but they have not shipped a product in 3 years. Take a look." I smiled a real smile. "Send it over. I love a good island." I opened my drawer and pulled out the check stub from my consulting fee. The total was staggering. It was enough to pay off my house. It was retire on your own terms money, earned by simply refusing to be compromised. I picked up my pen, a nice heavy Mont Blanc that I treated myself to. Some people think revenge is a dish best served cold. I do not agree. Revenge is a dish best served with a W-9 form and a legally binding invoice. I turned off the television. Back to work.